Welcome to Tea For Me, Please. Joining me today is David and Austin from Tearroir. And so for starters, hi guys.
Hi, Nicole.
Thanks for joining me today. And so you guys are joining me from Taipei, right?
Taipei, Taiwan.
Yep.
Awesome. I think that's probably the furthest distance my podcast has been yet. So for starters, maybe you guys can introduce yourselves and maybe let me know how you became interested in tea.
Yeah,
Sure.
definitely.
If you go first, Austin.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Hong Kong when I was younger and Indonesia, and I've always been interested in tea. I started drinking tea when I was younger, and then I guess I've been studying Chinese since I was young as well. When I came over to Asia to continue studying Chinese in Taiwan, I sort of fell in love with tea. I wound up buying enough tea in Taiwan before I left that customs stopped me trying to get back into the States. I had literally like a full carry-on suitcase of tea. And they thought I was smuggling drugs into the country, and I was like, what is this green leafy substance you have? So I've just always been super, super in love with tea, and after I graduated from college, I decided I would come back and try and start a business in tea. I met David, and we have been drinking tea and having adventures in tea for the last 15 months or so, having lots of fun, and feel really fortunate to be in Taiwan, where we're sort of close to all of the action of the tea and get to drink some pretty spectacular oolongs on a regular basis. David?
Yeah. Well, I guess I grew up in a house where Mum and Dad always drank loose leaf tea, but in a very English kind of style. You know, the warm teapot and the overboiled kind of black tea, milk and sugar and everything. But one of my very early memories at the age of 4 or 5 was playing with big tea chests that had this incredible smell. And we had 40 or 50 of them in the house when we were moving, and they were all marked Formosa black tea. And then when I was 18 or 19, I came over to Taiwan. And one of my favourite memories was actually drinking tea just near Chiang Kai-shek Memorial with my brother there. And so that was decades ago, a number of decades ago for it. And then, so tea became kind of a passion, but you couldn't get Chinese teas kind of anywhere, even in Chinatown. Apart from really crappy kind of jasmine, type tea. And then 17 or 18 years ago, I was in Korea, and my wife's sister, my wife was at work, and my sister had no English, I had no Korean, but she kind of said, I'm going to take you to this fantastic place. So we went for a 2-hour drive up into the mountains, and we ended up at a Buddhist Zen temple, and we sat there for about 3 hours just drinking tea, and so we had no language in common or anything except for the tea, and it was just this incredible experience sitting there. And so for me that was a real I guess almost spiritual moment that connected with tea as well. And then for the last 20 something years I've been doing business in Asia. And so when you're doing business, say, particularly in central China, etc., it's often sealed at the local tea house. So you'll kind of go for a couple of hours and just connect with people. So tea's been a big part of it. So 15 months ago, I moved to Taiwan about 2.5 years ago so that my son could learn Chinese. And about 18 months ago, I guess, Austin and I met in tea class here in Taipei. And it was, kind of fated to be, I guess, for it. And we kicked around various ideas, ironically, none of them related to tea, even though we'd met in tea class. And then after a few months of kind of talking over bottles of wine and many, 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 many cups of tea, we kind of went, we should actually, turn this passion into a business.
It's awesome. I'm definitely jealous of all the great oolongs that you guys have access to where you are. um,
Makes us fairly fussy these days.
I'm sure it does, definitely. And so, actually, all three of us, I believe, are steeping your dongding.
I'm at the point of drinking it.
Yeah, I have to say I jumped on a little bit on my drinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, it absolutely smells amazing. That's one of my favorite things about Taiwanese teas, especially the oolongs, is how aromatic they are.
Mm.
And so, maybe can you guys share a little bit of how you maybe source this particular tea?
Sure. Actually, so I guess what we're up to in tea is we travel around the world and we go and visit production in different areas, and we look for teas that are sort of the best representation of their origin and their style. So for this particular Dongding Oolong that we're tasting up at the moment, we wanted to find something that really gets at the essence of what a Dongding Oolong should taste like. And there's lots of different Dongding Oolongs produced in Taiwan at different levels of quality. And with all of the teas that we access, we're trying to find something that's just a really outstanding representation of its origin and its style. So that's all very fun, but sometimes it entails some very messy adventures. We have, especially for this particular tea, we tasted through some real stinkers. Nicole, I mean, you've tasted lots and lots of teas. I know because we've had the opportunity to chat a couple of times in the past, but being in tea over here every day has something new. You're tasting some new style, some new micro-production tea. You just don't quite know what's going to happen when you open up that bag. So we were tasting through a couple of teas, looking for this tea before we found it. And I can honestly tell you that there has only ever been one time in my life where I opened up a bag of tea to smell it. I love that moment of anticipation where you have that bag, right? You've got your scissors, and you're cutting it open, and you break the vacuum seal, and you hear the little, and then you just lean in to smell it, and you're like, oh, it's gonna be, I don't know what's coming, and then I opened up the bag, and just smack in my nose, it smells like. Did you ever have those Flintstones chew vitamins when you were younger? Yeah, just that really chemically vitamin smell, and there was hair in all of the tea, and some just like really things that should never be in tea were in a couple of the teas that we tasted looking for this one. So I guess
I think also what's quite interesting for us is it's a little bit unlike buying it in a shop. If you buy or you're tasting a tea in a shop in the US or Australia or wherever, you don't actually have to front the tea maker and politely kind of indicate that there's no way that you're interested in purchasing their tea because it's awful.
Yeah.
And we're frequently, I mean, just yesterday, in fact, we were down in Nantou tasting teas. And we've now got it down to a fine art. At first, when we started, we'd have these awkward moments, and we'd be having a tea, and Austin and I would shoot each other a look, and we'd know it was awful, and we'd never kind of take it. And we'd walk out with kilos of samples, and we'd feel obligated to kind of say how wonderful it was, and we'd just never get back to them. And yesterday, I was kind of noting that it was quite different. We'd shoot each other a look that just confirmed it was awful, and then we'd just kind of do this polite no comment. We kind of just didn't say anything, and it's kind of, would you like samples? No, actually, we wouldn't. It's quite changed now that we're, I don't know how many teas we are into it, but thousands of teas later, kind of thing. But yeah,
There's
sitting there with the tea maker, particularly there are two types of tea makers we've very much found. Some of those are very industrial. They've usually inherited the tea farm and they're not actually passionate about tea. They're passionate about business. And then there are tea masters, and they're the ones we really engage with, who are passionate about the tea. Really passionate. They're just like boutique winemakers. And they're the ones we infinitely prefer. But it's quite interesting sitting with those two different types of people, because a tea master will talk about how they selected the leaves and what the conditions were when they were picking those leaves and the growing season and everything. Well, the industrialists will sit there and just quote a price to you straight away. And they'll kind of go, yep, we can send you, 7,000 kilos of this, and, it's $1 a kilo or whatever. And, a tea master will sit there and sometimes they'll take 6 hours explaining the philosophy of the tea, or even longer. People like Gen T, when we've been with them, it's kind of been 16 hours or something that we've spent with them talking about their philosophy and how it blends with their religion and all the rest of it. They're quite fantastic experiences. Yeah.
So, sorry. The way that we found this particular tea is we tasted through some real stinkers. We're meeting with a lot of different tea makers, and finally we were sitting down with someone that I affectionately refer to as Shifu, which is like master or teacher. He's kind of a mentor over here, just a very precise tea maker. He has a very defined philosophy on how his teas should be. He wants to be true to the tea. He doesn't want to mess around with. He wants to bring out the best in each tea. And we were sitting down in this tea house, sort of on the side of a mountain in the Malkong region over here in Taiwan, and we had been tasting a couple of teas that day, and we were sitting down brewing up this particular dongding, and sort of just brewed it up, and we're smelling it off the lid, and it just really sang to us. The aroma. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. What types of notes are you sort of noticing in the aroma?
Definitely. A lot of dongdings that I've had are really super green and floral. This one's really interesting because it's very balanced. It does have, that really great floral quality to it, but it also has like a roasty, creamy, almost minerally kind of side to it too. So it really, I don't know, it kind of straddles the fence. As far as rolled oolongs go for a lot of, compared to a lot of what I've had.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting, because so you're tasting this live for the first time now, and we haven't discussed what this tea ought to taste like or anything like that. Some of those notes that you're noticing are exactly the way that I describe it to people sometimes. There's a minerality it kind of reminds me of like river rocks, and there's some caramely, like woody goodness going on in the aroma. It's got a fairly full body and mouthfeel.
I think what's interesting too there is you picked up on the balance in the tea, and it's something we actually spent a day with Asia's top wine taster and invited her to come out with us and taste teas. And she's a Masters of Wine based in Hong Kong, and was actually the first Asian to ever get a Masters of Wine. And we spent a fantastic day with her, and she was directly able to translate her wine knowledge into the tea. And when she was tasting these, she would always, because wine tasters always talk about the balance kind of in wine. You don't want it too acidic or too woody or whatever it is. And that's exactly the same for tea. And over here, that's what the top teas, people are looking for balance, etc. But often we find when we're tasting teas for export, they're not balanced and they're quite astringent, for example, or quite bitter. And they're teas that wouldn't be drunk here. They're only sent for export because there's a much more detailed understanding of what a tea should taste like. And so we've actually found our personal tastes changing quite significantly as we start to realise you don't have to put up with the astringency and stuff that occurs in cheaper teas, or the teas that you kind of find outside of Asia. So it's been quite an interesting. It's much more. The parallels with wine are actually much stronger than we thought they were.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of parallels between tea and wine. For my day job, I work in customer service for a wine store, and it's, I'm definitely the misfit tea person in the office, but, I've definitely picked up a lot as far as tasting terms to be able to put words to what I'm experiencing in the tea.
That's why you're talking about balance and stuff, which is something that a tea person rarely talks about, but actually should be looked for.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a difference too between the teas that we find here in Taiwan and sort of the teas that I could find back home in the States. Tea in Taiwan is a very interesting phenomenon. There are some really world-class teas that are produced here in very small quantities. They're super expensive, but they will blow the back of your head off. Like, they are really outstanding teas. But they're just produced in such small quantities that they could never be exported outside of Taiwan. Sort of if there's 10 kilos of, the spring 2014 Dayuling produced, and all of the passionate tea drinkers in Taiwan know that it's coming down off of the hills on the particular day that it's coming down off the hills, they're going to go and buy up that 10 kilos on the spot, and it will never have the chance to leave Taiwan. So a lot of the oolongs that are produced here for export tend to be at a different level of quality. And I know back in DC, where I spent a couple of years, there's some really cool tea shops and tea houses, but there's not so much balance in the teas. There's some bitterness that it's just it's been quite an eye-opener actually living here in Asia, exploring tea from this hemisphere where we can be down on the tea farms in a couple of hours if we need to be, or if we need to pop over to Darjeeling and take some teas up over there, get there in a day or so. It's convenient to travel to wherever we need to be for tea from Taiwan, and the styles and sort of expressions of tea that we've been lucky enough to taste over here have given us a new perspective on tea, I guess, coming over from the West.
I think also the fluency in Chinese makes an enormous difference to the access that we have. So there are some key suppliers here in the market who supply to the West because there's some limited English proficiency in their companies. But in most companies, for example, all the tea growers that we met with yesterday have zero English. And so the only way in which you can actually meet and talk with those people is in Chinese. And so that's kind of been a real advantage for us. And they're quite interested in Westerners who can engage with them in that fashion as well.
That's great that you guys are able to, be so close to the source of your teas. I know a lot of retailers here, that's what they struggle with. Is the expense for a U.S. retailer to be able to go to all these places and source the tea the way that somebody who's already in Asia can easily do. It's really difficult.
It's almost impossible. There's a handful of suppliers here in Taiwan who supply to the West. And there's 27,000 tea farms here in Taiwan. And there wouldn't be more than half a dozen places that actually supply to the West. because that language proficiency. And it's not a country where you can Google and find a tea master. They're introductions, and it's something that frustrates us quite often. You've got to be really embedded, and it takes years to actually get those introductions. And so it's been a fantastic kind of thing for us to be welcomed into their homes and everything, and be able to engage. And they're so excited to be able to engage with the West, and often they're really excited that people will be drinking their tea in New York and London and Sydney and stuff for the first time ever. And these are people who might only make 40 or 50 kilos of tea a year. So it's, quite exciting.
Your name, initially you had started off as kind of a blog, where you guys definitely have some really excellent articles that I often still refer to. So what is the meaning of Tearroir?
David, do you want to take that one?
Yep. So as I'm sure you know, it's originally from terroir, which is usually referred to in wine. And it's basically the impact that the agricultural nature of it has on the end product. So it's the influence of the air, the weather, the soil, obviously, that things are growing in, the geographical location, particularly the microclimates, where you can find for agricultural produce like wine, one side of a hill versus the other side of a hill will produce totally different characteristics. And that's exactly the same in tea. And so that's really what intensely interests us, is that you can take literally one tea field on the right hand side of the road versus one on the left hand side that have got a slightly different characteristic. There might be more chalk, for example, in one than the other, as a tea farmer was showing us a few weeks ago, and the teas from those tea fields are completely different. And so that's really what terroir is speaking to. And so that's really our whole philosophy, as Austin was saying before, is to try to find teas that really are indicative of the terroirs that they come from. And so that's something that we're really passionate about. It's something that the tea masters, when they're actually making the tea, have enormous influence over. And so we very much try to find tea masters whose philosophy is to get out of the way of the tea and just let it be what it wants to be as a product of the terroir. There are a lot of tea makers who follow the consumer trends, and so at the moment, for example, Tearroirs here, consumers like them to be very fragrant, very light on the palate, and very kind of floral. But traditionally, that wasn't what a Tearroir kind of was. And so they kind of bend the leaves and they force that process to produce teas like that. We very much like the tea masters who say, no, that's not what the leaves want to be. They want to be richer and fuller bodied and all the rest of it, and they just let that process happen. And so for us, we're really
concept in Chinese that sort of will succinctly, like for anybody that maybe is not from the wine world, terroir, in Chinese they say 天时地利人和, and it's kind of the weather, the climate, like the heavens, sky, right? All of the climatic and environmental conditions that influence how the tea bush grows. 地利 is like the earth, the soil, the land, the mineral content of the soil, what is growing in that soil, how does that help the tea bush to grow? And 人和 is like the people that are completing the process of tea production. And so David is getting at that. Really the best tea makers, we think, are ones that try to help the tea be what it is, and be true to the environmental and climatic conditions that the tea is grown in, and just bring out the best of what that tea is all about. So terroir, It's kind of a play on words there from the wine world, where all of these the conditions of terroir that influence grapes to produce a certain style of wine are the same conditions that will influence a tea plant to produce a particular characteristic in that tea. If that answers the question.
Yeah, it definitely does. I've started working at a tea house in New York, and all the teas are sourced basically by backpacking through China. And using wine analogies and explaining terroir to customers in that way, it really helps them to understand that this tea wouldn't be this tea if it wasn't from the place it's from.
Mm.
You know what? We were hanging out with our mutual friend Kathy not too long ago over here in Taiwan, and she was mentioning to us that you were killing it in the tea space over there.
Yeah, I mean we've only been open for about 4 months, and it's been really great to see such a positive response and people being really excited about tea.
Very cool.
Especially, served in gaiwans and not with scones and cream and jam. So.
Yes. And are you finding people enjoying, I guess, to be snobbish about it, the pure teas, without chocolate drops in them? And
definitely, that's pretty much when we don't have any flavored teas. Which at first people are like, really? Like not even jasmine? But then once they realize, like, oh, tea actually has flavor without adding stuff to it. So yeah, it's definitely been really cool to see, that I think people here in the States are finally starting to catch up with the rest of the world.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny. We were talking to some Taiwanese friends the other day, and they were talking about this whole how the West laughs at Chinese for putting lemonade or Coke into wine. And then we were saying, well, really, our equivalent of it, and you can be equally as horrified, is we put chocolate into your oolong and stuff. And they were like, wow, that's barbaric. And so they were, really having a chance to laugh at us for a change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Too funny. But so I definitely want to thank you guys for taking the time to talk with me and share your awesome dong ding. And so
thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, no problem. And so your website is tearroir.com, right? And so I'll make sure to link to that in the show notes and everything, so that everyone can check you out. Is there any parting thoughts before I stop the broadcast?
Yeah, actually, for me, I've enjoyed watching the podcasts, and I just wanted to thank you for the work that you're doing. I think that it's great. You're really helping connect the dots in the tea community, especially in the States. So for anybody that's watching or listening, I definitely encourage you to go back and listen to some of the other podcasts. You're doing some cool work and talking with some cool people.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's definitely, it's kind of just an excuse to get to talk to my friends and cool tea people, but also, share their stories with people who might not otherwise see it. So, but thank you again for, taking the time to talk with me, and I'm sure I'll talk to you guys soon.
Yeah, look forward to it.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.